This might be your favorite episode because not only are we going to tell you what we got right this year, but we're going to tell you what we got wrong so we know our comments are going to be filled with people bashing us for some of our takes. How could you think this way? How could you believe this? But we got to stand on what we said. We're going to own it a little bit, but we're also going to victory lap a couple things because, Ty, we deserve that after a long season, right?
Yeah.
We were right. We were right in some ways.
Yeah, we were. It's to be determined if we were more right than wrong. But you know what? I'm just going to celebrate the rights because that's it's not fun to look back at the negatives.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast. It is me and Tyler again. Lucas is still vacationing, gallivanting around the state of Florida, putting his feet up, not doing any work. So we are hunkering down. Make sure if you're listening in on the YouTube, you subscribe, turn on those notifications. If you're on the audio podcast, do the same thing. If you want to drop us a comment, tell us what you like, what you don't. We'd love to hear it. But yeah, we're gonna dive into really 5 things we got right, 5 things we got wrong this year in fantasy football. So Ty, let's not waste any more time and let's just jump right on into it. And I actually lied before we jumped into it. We just got to acknowledge that in the NFL right now, and even in college football, there has been some shaking and some happenings that we did not see coming last week or on Tuesday. We broke in the middle of our episode. Mike Vrabel fired by the Tennessee Titans. Pete Carroll now out as the coach of the Seattle Seahawks. Bill Belichick officially out as the coach of the New England Patriots. And on the college football side, the bombshell of them all is that Nick Saban retiring. Ty, like, what you dropped a tweet and it made me laugh. Like, what is football now? I mean, how do we react to this?
Well, and that came out before the Belichick news came out. So that, like, at this point, like, do we need to call it a different sport? Like, do we need to call it a different name at this point? Like, this has been a wild coaching carousel already, and there has been 0 hires. And we've got teams like the Panthers and Commanders who have like some of the richest owners. Then we've got the teams like Vegas that have their interim coach that needs to come back, but are they going to make the same mistake that they made with Rich Bisaccia, right? Like, I don't know if I've ever been really this excited for an offseason in a long time.
Yeah, I mean, and we talked about it too. Like, it's not just going to stop with the coaches. There are some ridiculous free agent names out there, wide receivers, running backs, even quarterbacks got a lot of free. So it is going to be a fun summer, just covering everything that's happened. And there's a lot of fun names in the draft too. I know you and Lucas have already been grinding the tape, right? You got the obvious Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison, but there's a lot more than that in these drafts. So it is very exciting right now. We're really excited to just really dive on in. I mean, and then you also got stuff like Jim Harbaugh. Is he coming to the NFL? We're going to have another summer of another offseason of that. But yeah, it's been crazy these last couple of days. And you know what? I expect, it might, like, as far as NFL breaking news, might be a little lull to maybe the Super Bowl. But after that, it's going to be I think we're going to have a lot to talk about moving forward. Until draft time and even after draft time. But the people didn't come here to listen to us babble about the craziness of the NFL. They came here to listen if what we were right on and what we were wrong on. And what we're going to start with is we're going to start with a right, and then we'll go wrong and right and wrong. We're going to start with a right, and it's one of the old heads. It's a guy that we've been banging the table for since we started the podcast. Is Mr. Keenan Allen. We told you, we were all over. Draft Keenan Allen. Quentin Johnson is not taking his job. Mike Williams isn't taking his job. And yeah, I know Mike Williams got hurt, but even when Mike Williams was out there, Keenan Allen was still phenomenal. Dude averaged 21.5 fantasy points per game. I know he only played 13 games, so I know you might be like, oh, it sucked down the stretch. I didn't have him. Obviously, Justin Herbert getting hurt doesn't help. But in 13 games, 108 receptions, 150 targets, 1,200 yards, and 7 touchdowns. I mean, I don't know what more we could have asked for Keenan Allen through only 13 games. I mean, he was incredible. He was wide receiver 5, I believe, on the year in receptions in only 13 games, which is just crazy to, to think about. So, yeah, Tyler, Keenan Allen, like, I don't know. I don't even know what to how to throw it over to you. Like, just speak to us a little bit about Keenan Allen this season.
So Keenan Allen, I think, was one of the casualties, I'll call it, of the aging veteran wide receiver that has a new young wide receiver in the mix. Because Quentin Johnson was drafted by the Chargers, and I think a lot of people said, like, oh no, like, what's that going to mean for Keenan Allen? And if he's aging already and you've got another wide receiver, how much of a hit is he going to take? And I think we all just we stayed strong on the fact that it's like Quentin Johnson is not going to play like as much as people think he is. And sure enough, like at the beginning of the season, it was Josh Palmer that was their wide receiver 3 and Quentin Johnson that was the wide receiver 4. Like he needed time to develop. And then at that point, they got into some shootouts early, right? And so Justin Herbert being Justin Herbert with Kellen Moore, they threw the ball a ton. And you saw Mike Williams. Mike Williams was doing pretty well for himself, but Keenan Allen was top 3 wide receiver. And then, he was arguably one of the best values in the drafts this year because he was doing so well for your fantasy teams. And then he decided to, I shouldn't say he decided. I think the team decided, like, we're not going to rush you back. So, look, Keenan was, I think next year, is the question where we start wondering, like, well, how much is this age thing going to affect him?
Mm-hmm.
What about the changes? Brandon Staley's not there. Is Kellen Moore going to be the offensive coordinator still? Who's going to be head coach? All that kind of stuff is going to really impact Keenan Allen. But for this year, we stayed true to the fact that Keenan Allen was going to stay relatively like untouched in terms of usage and volume and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think we've talked, like, if a guy like Malik Neighbors comes in, that would be a guy that I think we'd be a little more worried about from a Keenan Allen perspective. But the dude was 17-game pace, would have led the league in receptions, would have led the league in targets, would have been 3rd in yards. So there's not much more you can ask for. He's 3rd in points per game from a wide receiver perspective. That's more than Amon-Ra, Puka, and AJ Brown. From a points per game perspective, he had 5 more points per game than Mike Evans, 5.5 more than Stephon Diggs, 6 more points per game than Devontae Adams. Like, I don't know what more we could have asked for from Keenan Allen this season. So it was really good to see. And I do think, obviously he was hurt at the end of the year, but like you said, they didn't have a reason to bring him back. So they more than likely shut him down, especially with no Justin Herbert. If Justin Herbert's playing, I think this looks different. So I also think that's something we need to remember, moving forward about his injury is, yes, I think being 32 next year, he has had, some injury history that maybe we pump the brakes a little bit. Like, I'm not taking him 3rd round next year just because he was wide receiver 8. But at the same time, I don't think we should be so scared to take him because of, he missed 4 games and something like that. All righty, Ty. Now we got to move on to something we got wrong. We got an old head wide receiver right, but we got one of these young guys wrong, and his name was Jahan Dotson, or who we thought was going to be the best kept secret. It was just not good, and it wasn't good the whole time. There was never a bright spot for Jahan Dotson. I'm scrolling down our list right now of wide receivers. Jahan Dotson, wide receiver 56. 49 receptions, 83 targets, 518 yards, and the worst part of it all is he played all 17 games. He just wasn't used. Curtis Samuel was used much more than he was last season in 12 games. He saw 35 receptions on 61 targets for more yards, 523, and 7 touchdowns instead of 4 this year. Right? So we're expecting this next step. We're expecting, hey, Eric Bieniemy is going to throw the ball more, which they did, right? And that was what we thought. And then the step just wasn't made. Ty, what do you think went wrong here with Jahan Dotson?
I wonder if Eric Bieniemy just wasn't the right offensive coordinator for Washington, right? And I don't blame Eric Bieniemy for going and taking the opportunity because this was his chance to really get away from Andy Reid's shadow in Kansas City. I just don't know. Kansas City has always spread the ball out, always, right? You had Tyreek Hill, you had Travis Kelce, right? But then you had to throw the ball to other guys because defenses would just collapse on those two guys, right? And I should maybe I shouldn't say it like that. I should say it like this. Tyreek Hill is the field stretcher, so it opened up things for Travis Kelce. Taking Tyreek out, they had to start spreading the ball around to get Kelce more open. And I think Bieniemy kind of took that with him over to Washington, and that they didn't have a guy in that offense, which I think was, we could chalk up to, just not Terry McLaurin not beating Tyreek Hill. But I think the other part of it too, yes, Sam Howell was great in fantasy for a good stretch of, the season, but we are talking about a 5th round draft pick in Sam Howell. We're talking about a backup quarterback in Jacoby Brissett. Then it's the other option. I feel like it's a very similar situation to what Atlanta dealt with Taylor Heineke and Desmond Ridder. Like if you don't have the quarterback, it's just not really going to work out. So I think there's hope going into next year though, right? Let's see who the head coach is going to be. I would love for Ben Johnson to be the head coach for the Commanders. You've got the top draft pick, or you've got a top draft pick to get a Caleb Williams or a Drake May, or heck, even Jaden Daniels. But one of those 3 quarterbacks will elevate this offense to, I believe, right? If you pair that up with Ben Johnson, make a Terry McLaurin, a Jahan Dotson, relevant, because I think it's a little bit of everything, a little bit of poor quarterback play, a little bit of wrong scheme, that just on a bad team.
Yeah.
Right. We've seen wide receivers overcome overcome the bad record of their team and still put up good fantasy numbers. I think all those things combined it's what really created a poor season.
Yeah, I think the other issue too is they put 2 players in the same role. They put Jahan Dotson and Curtis Samuel in similar roles as the underneath guy. And so they, cannibalized on their fantasy value. Curtis Samuel was wide receiver 42, 62 receptions, 91 yards, 91 targets, 613 yards, 4 touchdowns, right? And so it's not what you wanted to see. After his last couple of years with Curtis Samuel, he's been a guy who's kind of involved, kind of not involved. And this year he really had more of a role, which maybe we could have seen knowing that he was Ron Rivera's, guy. He was the guy Ron Rivera brought with him from Carolina. They paid him a good chunk of change when they signed him a couple off seasons ago. But yeah, my worry about Jahan Dotson moving forward to next year, because you brought the optimism, I'm going to bring the pessimism a little bit, is the fact, yes, he's a first-round pick, but he was a first-round pick of a different owner, GM, and now head coach, and even offensive coordinator, right? So that is the worry, is like a Jerry Jeudy this year, unfortunately, another guy that's going to be on this list, where he kind of gets lost in the shuffle, right? Where the coach is like, if you draft him, if your GM draft him, right, you want to give him the ball, but if all those guys are gone, then you start to get to the point where we're just going to give the ball to our guys who we think can perform. And maybe Jahan Dotson does step up, right? We know he's a talented wide receiver. We know he can get it done. It'll just, be something to be careful of both sides for next year. We know what he can be, but we also know kind of what happens when new ownership and stuff comes in. All righty. Enough doom and gloom, Ty.
Yes, back to the good.
Let's bring it back to the good. And this is my favorite one to talk about. This is going to make me the happiest of all of them. Mr. Jahmyr Gibbs, league winner. I pounded it all offseason. I put it on my personal TikTok. I put it on our fellas page, put it on the podcast. I put it in YouTube videos. All my talk, if I had to sum it up in one player, was Jahmyr Gibbs this offseason. Let me tell you, Ty. Let me tell you, I was shaking in my boots for those first couple weeks when I thought that Jahmyr Gibbs was not going to get the role. In those first couple of weeks, we saw him before he got hurt. I got standard pulled up. Let me give me PPR. We saw him 8 points, 12 points, 9 points, 9 points. He had 2 receptions. Then he went up to 7, 1, and 4 with 7, 7, 17, and 8 carries, and one of those games where he only had 9 points, Monty wasn't even in for. So I was nervous. And then all of a sudden he comes back from injury and he goes running back 3, running back 1, running back 2, running back 3, running back 24, 29, 15, 3, 3. And then, of course, the last couple of weeks you're very upset about if you're in the championship because he got you 51 and 30. But over that back half of the year, Jahmyr Gibbs could have carried you or helped carry you to a fantasy championship. I don't want to just keep being the only one that's talking, Ty. Jahmyr Gibbs, what did you think about his rookie season? How did it compare to your expectations? And then just give us a little foreshadowing what you see moving forward for Jahmyr Gibbs.
So Jahmyr Gibbs was an interesting one for me because you could clearly tell when Detroit took him in the draft that they wanted the 1-2 punch with him and David Montgomery. Mm-hmm. I guess the thing I just didn't expect, though, was that it was quite literally going to be like a 50-50 split by the end of the year. Yeah. I thought it was more like with how much Detroit wants to run the ball. I thought for sure, like, I mean, it was a heavy share of David Montgomery at the beginning of the year. Mm-hmm. But I thought that was going to be more so like what we saw the rest of the year, right? Where short down and distance, goal line stuff is going to be Montgomery. And I guess progressively throughout the year, that just kind of shifted over to Jahmyr Gibbs. And I think it was just because Jahmyr Gibbs was hot hand at the time.
Yeah.
But it like, I guess, I, as the David Montgomery guy on this show, like it made me a little sad because I was like, but you had David Montgomery. Like, that's what you brought him in for. But I guess just from the fantasy perspective of things, like, Jahmyr Gibbs probably won you your league, and maybe not the last 2 weeks because they were pretty down weeks for him, but he at least got you into the playoffs as a pretty high seed. Mm-hmm. Or you probably bought low on him because he didn't do so well at the beginning of the year. But I think if you showed patience with Jahmyr Gibbs, you were rewarded handsomely because the guy, I mean, first game I feel like, was it last episode we talked about Gibbs? First 4 games off of his injury, he had 4 straight top 3 running back finishes. Like, he was unreal the rest of the season.
Yeah, he was. And, the fact he had 182 carries was great to see. 5.2 yards per attempt. The 10 touchdowns was the surprising part, right? I don't think that's necessarily what we were thinking. I think when we came into the year, it's like, he's not going to, hit double-digit touchdowns. Actually, he had 11 total touchdowns. For me, what was surprising is that he was a top 12 guy, but he only saw, 71 targets. I understand he still saw 5 a game, which is funny because that is what we saw from DeAndre Swift last year. 5 targets a game. That was like the number I kept throwing out was, hey, Swift was at 70 receptions. And so, just interesting from that perspective. It'll be fun to see how they continue to use him in this offense. But we talked about this, things, we need to know, we need to keep in mind. Coaching's going to change from an offensive coordinator's perspective. Ben Johnson is going to be gone. There is no way this dude is still the OC of the Lions after this season. I mean, you want to just speak to that a little bit on Ben Johnson, Ty?
I like, not to say that everything comes down to the coach, right? But Ben Johnson really took this offense to another level at the end of 2022, and he took it to another level in 2023. Mm-hmm. It matters. It matters, right? We saw Philly, right? And Philly, I think it was Brett Coleman who did a breakdown of their offense. He's like, they run a high school offense, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if you don't get the offensive coordinator change right, it has massive repercussions.
Yeah.
And any team is at risk of that, right, with a coaching change. But I think with the Lions, right, with how high and how good they were playing, they're probably most at risk for that.
Yep. I will say the one good thing is Dan Campbell is going to be I'm going to ground and pound. I'm going to use my running back. So that is a good thing for Gibbs moving forward, that he's going to be used. But it also is a little worrisome because if they go back to just strictly ground and pound, that could be all Monty next year, right? So it'll be interesting to see. I don't think Gibbs, even with the change, is going to fall off, a crazy amount. I still think they drafted him that high. They want to continue to use him. They know how explosive he is. They're going to continue to give him the ball. But like you said, we look at the Eagles this year, and you're just like, what the heck? What is going on with this offense? And that could happen. We're hoping that doesn't happen. Well, as a Vikings fan, I'm kind of hoping it does happen. But and from a fantasy football perspective, I'm hoping it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
I mean, here's the last thing I'll say about this tandem, I'll call it. There's Montgomery missed 4 games because of a rib injury or something like that. So it makes you wonder, like, well, did Jahmyr Gibbs impress enough in Monty's missed time that they were just like, we're going to roll with Gibbs as kind of the main guy? And it wasn't really even main guy, like, if that makes sense. It was that Jahmyr Gibbs got more snaps. Montgomery was getting more rushing attempts. So, makes you wonder, like, was there a lingering, was Monty's injury lingering a little bit, or did Jahmyr Gibbs, was again hot hand, or did he actually kind of like take over the backfield? I think that's something that we probably will never know. So yes, with the potential coaching change, how the season played out for the two of them, I think this backfield is going to be a bigger mystery. I'm not going to say question mark because that usually has a negative connotation to it.
Yeah.
There's going to be more to dig into when it comes to this backfield going into next year with everything.
Yeah, for sure. Alrighty. We have to do it. We got to go back to the bad.
Dang it.
And I'm going to say Lucas gave us permission for this, so we are going to strictly bash him for the next 5 minutes for this pick. It's Jerry Jeudy. And the reason Lucas said is Lucas was banging the drum for this guy, and he talked us into it because it was a good argument for Jerry Jeudy, right? We saw at the end of last year, he looked amazing with Russell Wilson. He looked really good on the field. He was the wide receiver 6 over the last 6 weeks. We talked with Alex Erickson from Fantasy Pros. He was on the same page, so I think that just got us into it more. We're just like, all right, Jerry Jeudy, he's our favorite mid-round, value wide receiver. If I'm not mistaken, right, he was banged up in the beginning of the season to start the year, and then he just never got it going. It was just like what we talked about with Jahan Dotson. He played 16 games after being hurt, 54 receptions on 87 targets, 758 yards, and only 2 touchdowns? Only 2 touchdowns from Jerry Jeudy. When his counterpart, Cortland Sutton, where's Cortland Sutton? Here, 10 touchdowns, right? So very interesting. The thing is, like, Cortland Sutton, we might say he's the main guy on this offense. Cortland Sutton only had 59 catches on 90 targets for 772 yards. So it wasn't actually that much better other than touchdowns between, Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton. So is this just system for Jerry Jeudy, Ty? Did we just truly underestimate or overestimate Sean Payton's effect on this offense?
Probably. I think Sean Payton played a pretty conservative offensive style with Russell Wilson. And I don't think it made that. Everyone has said, like, that's the biggest mystery, right? The sudden drop off of Russell Wilson, right? And so I don't think we acknowledge enough of the potential that this offense could actually just be a very basic offense. And I think we just kind of expected things to kind of pick up where they were at the end of the season. And Denver was playing pretty well at the end of the 2022 season. So I think, again, we just didn't even give the chance for this offense to really actually just be a very basic offense. And I think because of that, like, it impacted. I mean, Cortland Sutton, yeah, he had all the touchdowns and stuff, but his receiving numbers weren't even that great either. So like, it wasn't that like one person stood out in this offense. Like, if you took like a collective of how all, players on specific offenses finished and stuff, Denver is probably at the bottom or like bottom 3 in terms of like highest finishers on each team, right? Like Javonte Williams didn't even do anything. You had Samaje Perine, Russ, Cortland Sutton, Greg Dulcich was kind of a little sneaky tight end option just because there was some training camp buzz about him, right? Like, no one really on Denver had a season that like gets you excited going into next year. So as disappointing as it was, I think we just need to have a little bit better judgment and go, well, this could be a reality, right? Like what we saw and what we were hoping for, but then also express a reality that they could actually just take like 5,000 steps backwards and just keep it as simple as can be.
Yeah, I think that's just something. I think it's a little bit of overestimating how good Jerry Jeudy was, right? We knew that coming in, right? That was something that we were talking about with him, that we understood that risk of kind of extrapolating that out. But we had seen flashes before, right? He's a first round pick, Jerry Jeudy was. So it was kind of like this felt like the next natural step for him. But I want to talk about his quarterback real quick. Russell Wilson, you brought him up. 3,000 yards passing this year. 18th in the NFL. Let me just give you a couple guys who had more passing yards than him. Justin Herbert, who played 2 less games. Gardner Minshew, Geno Smith, Derek Carr had more. Jalen Hurts, we talk about, he had a down year. He had 800 more passing yards than Russell Wilson. Baker Mayfield threw for 1,000 more passing yards than Russell Wilson did this season. Right? I mean, it's just like it was not a good year from Russ. The reason, right, he finished quarterback 14 in fantasy this season. Reason? He ended up with 26 touchdowns. But when you were Jerry Jeudy and you only had 2, right, you're not feeling that same effect in the way that, Cortland Sutton did. So you talked about it like a more conservative offense through Russ. It definitely was. They were not throwing the ball down the field, only 6.9 yards per attempt. I mean, we're talking, lower than like Derek Carr had. Justin Herbert, we were frustrated. He didn't move the ball down the field. That's him. Justin Fields was in that same spot. Gardner Minshew in that same area. So Desmond Ridder had a higher yards per attempt than Russell Wilson did this year. So this team just didn't move the ball. And one of the reasons I want to talk about this is, right, we recognize we got things wrong, but let's talk about the process of why we got them wrong. So for us in this, it was an overestimation of probably a little bit of Jerry Jeudy, but then I think more of it was an overestimation of how good the Broncos were going to be this season. All right, Ty, I can tell by your face.
I just don't.
You're over this doom and gloom. You're over this doom and gloom. You need something good. You need something to lift the spirits, and I'm here to give it to you, Ty. I'm here to give it to you. Because the next thing we were right on, and I'm going to redeem Lucas a little bit here, was Dameon Pierce is a bust. This was Lucas was the head of the fan club for the Dameon Pierce is a bust fan club. Yeah. He led this train, and me and you were right behind him, right? You talked extensively this offseason that Devin Singletary, whether you like it or not, is going to factor into this offense. And not only did he factor into this offense, he took over this backfield. Tyler, is from the perspective of Dameon Pierce, is there any hope moving forward for him, or is this has he been relinquished to the backup role and this is where he's going to stay?
I think it comes down to a couple things. One, I don't want to keep going back to the well on this one, but I'm going to. It's coaching changes. Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator and play caller for the Texans, did wonders in this offense. If he leaves, oh boy. Like there, and you could look at that and go like, well, maybe then there's some hope, right? You get a guy that likes to power run a little bit more, that plays into Dameon Pierce's strengths just a little bit more. But if I'm completely honest, I think there's more working against Dameon Pierce than working for him in terms of becoming relevant again in fantasy. I mean, the Texans literally put Dameon Pierce on special teams at the end of the year. Like Devin Singletary is a free agent. So maybe, maybe there's some more change in that backfield, but like I said, I think there's more working against Dameon Pierce. We'll see, come June, July, August, right, what the situation actually looks like in Houston. But as of right now, I don't really think there's really a way back for Dameon Pierce.
Yeah, and I agree. I think one of the biggest reasons we were out on him is we looked at him and we said, okay, he's not crazy efficient. Mm-hmm. He doesn't really get receiving work, and he's in an offense we didn't expect to score a lot of touchdowns. Mm-hmm. Well, he was way more inefficient than we thought he would be. 2.9 yards per carry on 145 carries. I mean, abysmally low, brutally low. We talk about Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders was bad. Miles Sanders was still at 3.3 yards per carry, right? So Singletary still almost half a yard below that. He's below Clyde Edwards-Helaire in yards per carry. And then he still didn't catch any passes. The Texans did score a lot of touchdowns. The Texans offense was great, but he was just so inefficient so early on, had a little injury, and then Devin Singletary completely took over. And I agree with you. I don't really see a way back for him on this Texans team to being truly relevant again in the way that he was. I'm going to just transition us in then to this guy who I just mentioned, Miles Sanders, on the bad side. This one hurts. This one hurts that we got it wrong because it's a guy I've been so out on since we started this podcast. And yet I decided, hey, he's on a worse team in a worse situation. I'm going to trust in him now. But Tyler, I followed the money. Dude got paid 3 years, $21 million. I followed what the coach was saying. Hey, we're going to give you 55 to 60 receptions this year. Then I followed the efficiency from last year, 5 yards per carry. And Miles Sanders was terrible, Ty. Was terrible. Can you just speak to, like, I don't remember how high you were on Miles Sanders compared to me. I know he was my running back 14 coming into the season, which is just embarrassing to say. For you going into the season, what gave you any hope in Miles Sanders? And like, just run down his season real quick of just how terrible it was.
I think just to explain where we were coming from in terms of, valuing Miles Sanders, we looked at, rookie quarterback with a coach like Frank Reich and wide receivers, Adam Thielen, DJ Chark, and rookie Jonathan Mingo that needs to develop. Like they, it seemed like on the surface, they had no choice but to just run the ball, that Miles Sanders was going to get touches to no end because there was no one else. And I think what we've realized or at least what this season has taught us, is that Miles Sanders, not going to call him a merchant for anything, but I think a bigger reason why he found success in Philadelphia was because they were on one of the, most efficient offenses.
Yep.
And teams, like Jalen Hurts was still able to get his push touchdowns and stuff. But since it got down to the goal line so often, then Miles Sanders was able to find the end zone and then, driving the field on their possessions and stuff. You have one of the best offensive lines, right? Like that you can run behind. Carolina's offensive line there's no debate in terms of who had a worse offensive line than Carolina. Yep. And I think all of those things just kind of created what happened this season for Miles Sanders, to the point where he got replaced by Chuba Hubbard. And I would not be surprised if Miles Sanders is actually going to be a free agent again after this year, that Carolina just says, like, that wasn't worth it. We're just going to get rid of it.
For sure. And I guess that leads me to a question about DeAndre Swift then. Because I think he's a free agent after this year, isn't he? Or does he have one more year? He's a free agent. He had 1,050 yards rushing on 4.6 yards per carry. So are you excited then about DeAndre Swift, or is the worry that he's just another Miles Sanders, just a guy who was able to capitalize on a good Eagles offensive line, that you're just going to stay away from him if he moves to another, let's say, like another bad team following a bag?
So I'll answer it like this. If Swift stays in Philadelphia, I'm going to be I won't have a whole lot of him, but I'll have a little bit, because the offense is good enough. I can't even say it's good enough, because the counter argument that I had for DeAndre Swift was that if Brian Johnson is still the offensive coordinator in Philly, how much better can I really get going into year 2, right? So the thing that plagued DeAndre Swift and the thing that helped Miles Sanders, obviously play calling, but goal line stuff, literally all the goal line stuff literally went to Jalen Hurts. Like, there was zero running back help from, inside the 5 and stuff. So
he had 5 touchdowns.
Yeah. Like, you always want to look for the best teams, the best offenses, and try to get a piece or two if you can from those offenses. So that's why I'm kind of like, on the fence a little bit about a guy like DeAndre Swift. And really just, I guess maybe the way to say it, I just think maybe Miles Sanders' season in Philadelphia was just right place, right time.
Yeah.
And it's going to be hard to recreate that with anyone else.
Sure. For sure. And the last thing I'll add is I don't think we thought Chuba Hubbard was bust. Like we thought there was no reason he was going to see the field. We talked about this on Tuesday's episode when we were going over the bus. Like we thought, oh, Deonta Foreman played over you consistently. You didn't even see the field when he was out there. Yeah, okay. And there's no chance when Miles Sanders comes that you're going to see the field. But yet he had 238 carries. I mean, he still only had 3.8 yards per carry. But and then add another 39 receptions on top of that. 277 touches from Chuba Hubbard this year. I don't think any of us really saw that coming. But yeah, let's get out of this doom and gloom area. We're going to actually take a quick break. We're going to hear from our friends over at Underdog Fantasy super fast. And then we are going to finish off with our last two things we got right and our last two things that we got wrong.
Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100.
I also don't want it to feel like we're just making excuses why we got things wrong. Like we will own that we got these wrong. Like, I mean, it was, whether it was misjudged, like we talked about with Miles Sanders and a little bit with Jerry Jeudy, like maybe it was just a misjudgment of talent, how good they were. It was misjudgment of situation, right? We're just explaining what misjudgments we had about these guys and their situation. But Tyler, I'm going to give this to you, right? I had my Gibbs little victory lap. But you had your David Montgomery one, and the first thing I just want to do to just tell the people, right? Tyler was all over David Montgomery, and you might go, okay, he was really good, but he wasn't like, top 5 or anything. Okay, these are the players that David Montgomery was drafted behind this season: Jerry Jeudy, Isaiah Pacheco, George Pickens, Dalvin Cook, Mike Williams, Drake London, Chris Godwin, Kyle Pitts, Cam Akers, Tyler Lockett, Javonte Williams. Okay. David Montgomery was taken a full round and a half behind Javonte Williams. And yet David Montgomery this season, what did he average? 16.5 points per game. Is that what it came out to? 14.8 is what it ended up. He was at 17 for a while. Running back 17 on the season. Top 15 running back points per game. Ty, I'm going to give you the floor on David Montgomery. And you can just whatever direction you want to go. You can have it.
I don't think people talked about enough the fact that David Montgomery was literally stepping into the Jamal Williams role. Quite literally. And before the injury, the guy had scored in every single game at least once. He had a game against Green Bay where he scored 3 times. And then he did score once almost every game. He didn't score in only 2 games the rest of the season after their bye week. But again, I think the intrigue for David Montgomery for me was, again, he's going to be on the goal line so much because I think this Detroit offense is going to be able to, get down the field and get to the end zone. Now, I did not foresee Jahmyr Gibbs really kind of taking over, but I think the thing that at least gives me some optimism going into next year, and I know we just talked about the whole Ben Johnson thing, but let's say everything stays the same, right? You've got same coaching, same personnel, all that stuff. The guy is still getting double-digit carries every game, right? And so you're like, well, that kind of, if he's not going to get any receiving work, so what's the value? It's the value that he's going to be on the goal line, right? So for me, it was more so of look at the guys ahead in worse offenses with some question marks about everything else in their situation. I'll just take the chance, David Montgomery. And he paid off really well at the beginning of the year. Running back 11, running back 19, running back 2, running back 5, and then he got hurt. And then it wasn't really the same after that, but I I was shocked to see how low he was going. And I wondered if it was just people doubting the Detroit offense and saying, well, it's Detroit. But David Montgomery made me feel really, really smart for a good chunk of the season. And I just hope that he gets back to what he was, what he was doing at the beginning of the season, because that was special, what he was doing at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, and I think too, like you talk about, you said it a lot of times. He's stepping in the Jamal Williams role, but not only that, he's better than Jamal Williams. Last year, Jamal Williams had 17 total touchdowns. David Montgomery had 13 this year, and averaged 1.5 points more than Jamal Williams. Because you know what? I mean, he only had 24 targets, but he still caught 16 of them. He still, made it work on the ground in 14 games this year. He had 51 rushing yards less than Jamal Williams on 43 less carries. Right. So he was way more efficient, 4.6 yards per carry. Like I said, scored 13 touchdowns, had a 75-yard rushing touchdown, something Jamal Williams wouldn't have had last year. And I think you're right. If we watch this duo move forward, we just saw them each have double-digit touchdowns, right, this season. 13 for David Montgomery and then 11 for Jahmyr Gibbs. They can coexist together because this is the way that they want to run this offense. They want to run it in the 1-2 punch, and they were consistent with it, and they never shied away. And that's why it was okay during this offseason for me to go, I love Jahmyr Gibbs. I'm all in Jahmyr Gibbs. And you go, I love David Montgomery. I'm all in on David Montgomery. And again, to your point, like, yeah, he wasn't as great down the stretch. Only game he had under double-digit points for PPR was the game he got hurt and left early in.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He was double-digit points the rest of the way. So he was consistent. He didn't kill you in any week. No, he didn't get you super exciting, but that was something also that you said coming into the year was, this isn't a guy who's going to necessarily score you 25 points a week. He did have those weeks, and they were awesome, right? We love those weeks, like against the Packers. But he's going to be a guy who's going to consistently get you fantasy points. And when you draft him in the 7th round, there's not much more you can ask for from a 7th round running back. That is a phenomenal value to finish as the top 17 back. All right, Tyler, I gave you something good. Now I got to take it away. Tony Pollard. I mean, that's how I feel. I don't know. That's how you're feeling right now too. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. So I don't know. I'll give it to you.
I'll start off with a stat, and then I'm gonna go after people because that's how I feel. I just feel angry about the situation. Of all running backs this year that had over 200 carries, Tony Pollard ranked. What would that be? Because there was 23 running backs that had over 200 carries. He ranked in the bottom 5 in yards before contact per attempt. The guy could not get going before getting contact, and that shouldn't paint the entire picture. Mm-hmm. But what I want that to say, what I want to say out of that is, this team, for whatever reason, and maybe it was Kellen Moore or whatever, they could not run the ball for their life this year. Mm-mm. And I'm not going to sit here and say that it's going to be their downfall, but don't be surprised if they make an early exit in the playoffs because they can't run the ball. They literally cannot run the ball. And they had this brilliant idea halfway through the season of, what if we added in a Rico Dowdle? Maybe that gets the defense off balance. Excuse me? Excuse me? I had so many people. I shouldn't say so many people. There were people that genuinely believed that Rico Dowdle was the change of pace back, was just as good as Tony Pollard in playing. Here's the thing, okay? Tony Pollard, he is, let me pull up the stats. There he is. 6 foot, 210 pounds. Rico Dowdle, you ready for this one? 5'11", 210. They are the exact same size. The exact same size. oh, but he's a change back. He's the power back. You know what actually made Tony Pollard as good as he was when Zeke was there? It was because Tony Pollard was a change of pace back. And that hurts to say.
Yeah.
But it's so shocking because he had moments where he was like, if you can get him the full workload, and Dallas fans, don't backtrack on me now. Y'all clamored, were pounding the table for Tony Pollard to get the line share of touches over Ezekiel Elliott.
Mhm.
But then Tony Pollard just doesn't do well with that role. And then you're like, well, no, then, Rico Dowdle, needed to play and help. Stop it. What this comes down to is that Dallas just has no run game to bank off of. I'll just say it like that. And they relied on Dak. They relied on CeeDee Lamb. And if there's anything we got wrong, it's placing the expectation that he was going to be in the bell cow role, which he kind of was. But, it comes down to efficiency. And for whatever reason, the efficiency was down this year. So you can say that we were wrong, but I would like to find whoever thought that Tony Pollard was not going to do well and ask him why they thought that he wasn't going to do well. And I guarantee you they will not have a legitimate answer to give you.
Yeah, I mean, the hard part is, like, I was looking at your draft guide, Ty, what you have for Tony Pollard. He had 15 less touches than what you gave him. He had the same amount of, he had one or three more receptions than what you gave him, and then he had 12 more carries than what you gave him. The problem was he went 5.5 yards per carry, 5.2 yards per carry, and then this year he's at 4 yards per carry. And again, we also only saw 6 touchdowns from Tony Pollard. I mean, this is a guy who scored 9 last year with Zeke. And Pollard did say, my leg was still bugging me halfway through the season. So maybe that plays into it. I'm not going to say it, it's an excuse for it. But, we listened to a lot of the, the fantasy doctors and stuff like that. And they said Tony Pollard should be back fine. So, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it's scheme. Maybe it was the fact that he, taking over, just couldn't step into that role. We kind of saw that with Alexander Madison a little bit. I think it was different, right? Because Alexander Madison had never finished as a top 10 running back on a season. But yeah, I agree with you. This one's the most frustrating because this one felt obvious.
Mm-hmm.
It felt obvious that they're going to give him more carries. They're going to give him more work in the receiving game, which they did. So he should take a step forward, and yet he didn't because his efficiency was so piss poor. It's just, it hurts. This one hurts, and I'm with you on that. It was just frustrating all year long.
It's the ones where all the signs point to, yes, this is going to work. And for whatever the reason is, it doesn't work out.
Yeah. Because,
not only did you, have a ton of shares and invest in Tony Pollard heavily with your teams, but you pretty much staked, you that was your guy. That for me, that was my guy this year.
Yeah.
And so that hurt. And then you've got people that are going to victory lap and say like, well, you're a moron because you thought that was going to go well. And you're like, okay, then again, give me the reason why. Right. And we will never get that reason.
Yeah. And it's weird too, because this offense was good, right? Like moving the ball down the field. Dak had 4,500 yards. So 36 touchdowns. That should have alleviated all pressure from Tony Pollard. And yet he only averaged 4 yards per carry. So before we get any more worked up on it, let's move on. We'll go to go back to something we got right, and that was Nico Collins. Luke's made a TikTok coming out, best kept sleeper. You were really in on Nico Collins. I wasn't as much in on Nico Collins. So this is more you too, but I do want to just give you the credit of how good Nico Collins was this year. Nico Collins. Let's go to where this man was drafted. I'm scrolling. Okay.
I got you. You ready for this?
I'm ready.
Wide receiver 60.
Oh my gosh.
14th round.
Oh my. Can I name you a couple guys taken ahead of this man? Alan Lazard. Darnell Mooney. Jameson Williams knowing that he was going to be suspended. Let me see. Jacoby Myers played pretty well, actually. I'll give it to that. Quentin Johnson, Rashad Bateman, Elijah Mitchell went before him. Kenny
Oh,
Gainwell, Sky Moore, right? Juju Smith-Schuster went in full 2 rounds ahead of him. And Nico Collins comes out with CJ Stroud and drops a mind-bending season, wide receiver 12.
wide receiver 7 in fantasy points per game.
He played 15 games, 80 receptions on only 109 targets. The fact that he only missed 29 passes was crazy. Mike Evans has 79 receptions on 136 targets. Mike Evans saw another 27 targets than him, and only caught one less ball. 1,297 yards, 16.2 yards per catch. I think, if I'm not mistaken, for every wide receiver above 100, Amari Cooper and DK Metcalf. Only 2 players with more than 100 targets who have a better yards per catch than Nico Collins. He had another 8 touchdowns. Man, yeah, Ty, I'm just gonna tell you, dude, that was a great call for you and Lucas. Like, I will not sit here and try and take credit for that. We looked at it. Nico Collins was my wide receiver 100 this year. Oh my gosh, that is embarrassing.
I'm surprised you wanted to admit that.
I have to admit that. You can go pull the receipt on that one. That was in our draft guide. But yeah, and he's one of those guys that was better than I thought, a lot better than I thought. And CJ Stroud was a lot better than I thought. And this offense as a whole was a lot better than I thought. So it was the perfect storm for Nico Collins. So if you were in on Nico Collins, which is funny, I had him so low because I had him in 18% of my best ball drafts for some reason. So for some reason, I was still taking him, but I had him really low. But yeah, so it was that perfect storm. And yeah, Ty, just can you give us a little insight? Beginning of the season, why were you in on Nico Collins?
I think I was in on Nico Collins, right? So I think the thing that started it off was that there was the training camp buzz that CJ Stroud and Nico Collins just had this unreal connection in their practices and stuff like that. And that's a pretty common, buzzword, right? Connection. And the only reason why it intrigued me more than someone like Sam Laporta, because I talked about this on my 7 best values YouTube video that you should check out. Because Sam Laporta also had the same training camp buzz that he was going to be heavily utilized in this offense and stuff like that. And I think the reason why I was more willing to go take Nico Collins than a Sam Laporta, and you can debate if that was the right choice or not, was because there was nothing set in stone with Houston. There was no guy already in that offense, right? You knew there was going to be a split backfield with 2 not super great running backs, right? And Devin Singletary, Dameon Pierce. Your only other competition was really Dalton Schultz, because you're then looking at Robert Woods, a 3rd or 4th round rookie, and Tank Dell at the time. And then Noah Brown, John Mechie, Xavier Hutchinson, right? I was willing to take the chance on Nico Collins on the chance that they were better than perceived or expected to be. And sure enough, they were. So I think this one, you know how I was saying with Tony Pollard, right? Like, there may be just some unexplained reasons why things didn't work out. I am the same way with Nico Collins, just on the opposite side of just I cannot tell you what exactly went right for Houston, but everything went right for Houston, right? And sometimes, like, you need a little bit of luck. Sometimes you do need to just, stumble upon a player in your draft, right? No one wants to admit that there's luck in fantasy football, but there is, especially when it comes to late round wide receivers like Nico Collins, who can finish top 10 in fantasy points per game.
Yeah, I think this also brings me back, just listening to you say that, brings me back to when we had Hayden Christensen on, and he talked about he would stack teams that were considered bad and all had late round ADPs. Houston was one of them. The Patriots another, right? And so some of your teams are going to hit because you got this late round stack. You had CJ Stroud, you had Nico Collins. It was awesome. But then you're going to have teams like the Patriots who are actually as good as everyone thought they were going to be, right? But that when we talk about best ball and stuff like that, that it is important to, hit on these late round guys. I also did say that Nico Collins had the best yards per catch, other than DK and Amari. I was wrong. Brandon Ayuk and George Pickens also had a higher yards per catch, but so I just wanted to correct that before, in case anybody wanted to come after me. We're going to end on a low note.
Can I say one more thing about Nico Collins?
Yes, of course.
I fear that Houston could have a Seattle type season next year.
Ooh.
If you lose Bobby Slowick, right, and Gino finished super high at quarterback 5 in 2022,
something like that, yeah,
on the back of having like a 70% completion percentage, right? Like and then Dave Canales leaves, and for whatever reason, we see a drop off in the offense. And I worry that Houston could have that similar kind of arc next year if some things change and some variables change, I'll call it. And I think Nico Collins could potentially, it could potentially be going too high in drafts next year. Hopefully I'm wrong. But there's no certainty, I'll say, about Nico Collins or really even Tank Dell next year.
For sure. Yeah, I'd agree with that. And then, like I said, last thing we're going to end on is just young quarterbacks. I think that was something that we're going to have to go back to the drawing board on the way we evaluate, the way we project young quarterbacks, because we were way all over the board on them. We talk about guys like Jordan Love, Brock Purdy, obviously, CJ Stroud. And, a lot of it has to do with just understanding where these guys are at coming in. We had Brock Purdy dealing with his UCL there. And I think that, kind of played a factor. We talked about, Lucas up until right before the season had Trey Lance as the starting quarterback right before he got traded, because we weren't even sure if Brock Purdy was going to be ready to start the season. I mean, that that's just where we were at. And the dude comes out and drops 4,200 yards, 31 touchdowns, has another 2 rushing touchdowns in the year, 19.2 fantasy points, quarterback 6. Jordan Love, another one. He's dealing with all this Aaron Rodgers stuff all offseason. Aaron Rodgers finally gets dealt late in the year. He comes in, he has no wide receivers, and he plays fantastic down the end of the stretch. Those were 2 guys that we were lower on. CJ Stroud, like you had said, ended up being quarterback 11. I think he's quarterback 7 in points per game. 4,100 yards. And so it's, for us, something we need to work on. I think me and you talked about this before we started the show, is how do we correct this? How do we come back and go, okay, we need to figure this out? Because obviously there's anomalies to this, to some of this stuff, right? Like CJ Stroud, I don't think we would have gotten as good as he was, no matter, what we were looking at, right? We're not going to put him as the quarterback 7 in points per game. But yeah, is there anything you want to add to that, of like just kind of missing on a couple young QBs?
I feel like young QBs are such a high risk, high reward pick in fantasy leagues that we, not to say that like we need to be a little more kind to ourselves on this one, but I think, we have to account for team-wide development more so than just personal development, right? Like,
yes,
I think like, yes, Brock Purdy was dealing with the injuries. Jordan Love, the question mark that was the Packers offense at the beginning of the year, CJ Stroud in Houston, it's at least kind of acknowledging a reality that they actually are one of the top offenses in the league. And, you can, the thing is, you can acknowledge, right, that, some offenses will be, you expect offenses to be worse than they actually can potentially be, if that makes sense. Like, you'd rather bank on an offense not doing well than an offense doing well, if that makes sense. So, again, it's acknowledging all possible realities. It's still staying true to what you think will happen, but it's still then admitting, like, could see this one coming.
Yeah, and I mean, I think back to it too. Like, the NFL draft. Even trading for players, signing players, like these guys who do it on a daily basis get it wrong. And so it's hard to when we can't see, what's going on behind the scenes sometimes. But yeah, it's for us, this was something that we recognized and we were like, okay, this wasn't a strong point for us. This wasn't this year with the younger quarterbacks, right? We did pretty good on some of the older guys. Tua was right around our consensus. Trevor Lawrence fell farther. Matt Stafford right around our consensus. Kirk Cousins played well, kind of like how we all thought before he got hurt. Just Joe Burrow. So it's just going to come down to this next year. Okay, how do you refine? How do you change it up a little bit? And that comes for all 5 of these guys. Like we don't just give this to you guys so you can just pound us and say, "Oh, you guys are idiots," and so we can talk through with you guys. Okay, this is why we missed. This is what we think, and this is now we got to go back and figure out how we're going to be better next year. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the biggest part of it. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a fun exercise. Look at what we got right. I think it sucks to look at what you got wrong, but
it's part of what we do.
Yep. All in all, I think it was a good episode today. Exciting. Like we said, we got a lot of changes coming in the NFL. No more Arthur Smith's going to ruin your team. So that's exciting. We got the playoffs coming up. We'll see if Tua can finally handle the cold. But we keep telling you guys, and we're going to stay true to it. We got so much content coming out for you for the rest of the year. We will at minimum have at least one podcast and one YouTube video each week. We will always have shorts, at least four a week. So we will keep it coming from you guys. We will keep you updated on all the offseason moves, all the draft hype, and everything. Ty, anything to add before we hop off?
No, hopefully you listen to us on some of our good takes. Hopefully you faded us in some of our wrong takes. But look, some things go the way you want them to, some things don't. And guess what? That's football. And at the end of the day, it's a game. It's a game.
And officially, Marvin Harris has declared for the NFL draft, so that is exciting.
Wow, shocker! No one saw that.
No more of those rumors that Ohio State's going to pay him $15 million to stay one more year. So we are over that. That is exciting. But yeah, I will see you on Friday if you tune in for my biggest bust of the year. Otherwise, we will see you next Tuesday for the podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Deuces.